Hello, everybody. Mr. Eford here. I hope you guys are doing well. We are getting ready to start a new unit in social studies, and that means we need to learn some new words so that we can be successful. So if you guys will hang out with me for the next few minutes, we are going to cover our unit vocabulary, our content vocabulary for the prehistoric period. Now, students, as we do this, if you will please take notes on the KME documents, which are linked below. And we'll get started. So here we go. First word that you guys need to know is the Stone Age. Now, the Stone Age is exactly what it sounds like. Okay, we're talking about a broad prehistoric period or span of time during which stone was widely used to make implements. Now, that word implements really just means tools, things that people used. Okay, so they made stone implements or tools that either had an edge, a point, or a percussion surface, okay? And they could be used for many different purposes. These stone tools were used to hunt. They were used to build things. They were used to construct and to defend. And this new technology using stone made life easier for the people who lived during this period. That's one of the things we're going to talk a lot about as we go through our prehistory unit, is how technology was used to advance civilization. And move people toward a point where they became modernized. Okay, so we're going to move from Stone Age and we're going to move into our next term. And if you guys need to slow down or stop at any point to put your notes down, that's perfectly fine. You can go back and watch the video again as well. But we're going to move on to the next term. All right, and that term is Paleolithic. Okay, Paleolithic simply describes the earliest period of the Stone Age. Okay, this goes as back far in history as we can go in looking at the stone tools that we can discover. And archaeologists have discovered these different tools from thousands and thousands of years ago. Paleolithic tools are usually characterized by rough, chipped edges. They're not as refined as tools that we would find later on. Paleolithic age is also known as the Old Stone Age, and Paleolithic actually translates into old stone. The prefix paleo is a prefix which simply means very old, and then lith is a Greek root word which means stone. So Paleolithic literally means old stone. All right, here we go. We're going to move forward. Next up, we have the nomads, okay? And nomads are any group of people who are constantly moving from one place to another, okay? Our definition says that a nomad is a member of a community of people who live in different locations. That just means that they move, okay? They move from one place to another. Typically, nomads, especially during the prehistoric period, are moving in search of resources. They're looking for food. They're looking for shelter. They're looking for the things that they need to be able to survive. And our next definition is actually going to go right along hand in hand with the definition for nomads. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move to that next definition at this point in time. Okay, and that is hunter-gatherers. Okay, now, again, nomad and hunter-gatherer, they're going to go hand in hand because of the way people were. They had to live during this time. Hunter-gatherers were humans who lived in a society where almost all of the food that they obtained, they had to get through what was called foraging. And that means that they go out and they collect wild plants, and they would hunt wild game. And as soon as the game moved or the plants disappeared, or you had harvested all that you could eat from a certain area, you had to move to the next area to search for more food. So living in a hunter-gatherer society meant that you had to be nomadic. You had to be willing to follow whatever your food source was. When the animals moved, you had to follow them. When you had harvested all the food that was in an area, you gathered all the berries and the nuts and the things that you could find, you had to move to the next area to search for food. Okay, so those are the hunter-gatherers. All right, cave art. We find out a good deal about how people lived during the prehistoric period from cave art, because one of the defining characteristics of the prehistoric period is that there is no written language. And so we don't have a record of history that's been written down. The only things that we can study are the tools that we find, and we study the art that we find on these cave walls. All right, so cave art are drawings or paintings that we find on cave walls and ceilings. They are mainly from prehistoric origin, meaning coming before the age of the written language. And some of them are dated back to 40,000 years ago, meaning that they are very, very old. And as we read through the studies weekly here in this unit, you guys are going to be able to discover some of the cave paintings that have been discovered in different parts of the world and find out what we have learned from some of those cave drawings. All right, here we go. We're going to move forward here. Next up, we have technology. And this is a word that we don't tend to associate with the Stone Age. And we don't go back and look at people who lived thousands and thousands of years ago and think about the technology that they used. But the way that we're going to define technology, we're going to see that prehistoric humans had access to some really neat technology that allowed them to live and survive during this time. So technology, for our purposes, is going to be the use of tools for survival. Some examples of this are using stone tools to hunt with, to build with, to just perform tasks that make life easier. Fire is considered a form of technology that when we discovered how to make fire that provided protection during the night, it allowed us to cook food. So we now have more nutritious foods to eat, providing hunting tools so that we could hunt larger and maybe even more dangerous prey so that we had food to eat. All of this because of technology. Okay. All right. So when we talk about technology, we're not just talking about cell phones and computers and using the internet and all the forms of technology that we have access to today. We can look at any form of tool, anything that makes life easier, and that is a form of technology. Okay. All right. Let's move forward here. Next up, we have the Ice Age, and we've got our cool characters here, Manny in the background, and my kids love watching the Ice Age movies. But the Ice Age, we're going to define that as a period of long-term reduction in temperatures. In other words, it got colder here on planet Earth. So in the surface, in the atmosphere, it gets colder. It resulted in the presence or expansion of continental and polar ice sheets and alpine glaciers. There was more snow and ice during the Ice Age, but it did not mean that everything was covered in ice. There were parts of the globe which were colder, but they were not frozen like people tend to think. We're going to talk about some of the things that we think happened during the Ice Age as we move forward. We're going to talk about patterns of migration as people sought areas where it was warmer and easier to survive. And we're going to actually look at that later on as we look at our definitions as well. So that's the Ice Age. The Earth got colder, but it did not mean that it was totally frozen everywhere. All right, here we go. We're going to move forward here. All right, the land bridge. This is what I was talking about with patterns of migration during the Ice Age. All right, the land bridge is an isthmus, and that just means a very narrow strip of land connecting two areas. All right, so it was an isthmus or wider land connection between otherwise separate areas over which animals and plants were able to cross and colonize in new lands. Now, the specific place that we're talking about there being an isthmus is between Alaska and Asia, okay, or where Russia is located now. We believe that a very long time ago that there was a narrow land bridge connecting those two areas and that people migrated across, okay, and they brought seeds for plants, animals crossed over, and that allowed migration from one continent to another where now there is a body of water and people can't cross on foot. That land bridge is called the Bering Land Bridge, and it's now where the Bering Strait is, which separates Alaska and Asia. Okay, so that's the land bridge theory. It's one theory about how people move from Asia into what is now North America. All right, here we go. We're going to move forward. Next up, we have the Neolithic Age, okay, where Paleolithic meant old stone. Neolithic actually translates into new stone, okay? We're still talking about a very long time ago, but we're moving forward and we're progressing toward the more modern times as we move into the Neolithic Age. It's often called the New Stone Age, and it was a period in which the development of human technology really kind of moved forward. We think that this period began around 15,200 BC. We're going to see new stone tools. We're going to see the tools that were used being refined and made better so that they could do the task that they were meant to do more efficiently. We see the construction of tools like the addle, which allows people to throw spears a lot farther and a lot more accurately. They could hunt larger animals more safely. We see all sorts of advancements during the Neolithic age, which are going to bring us closer to this more modern period of time. Okay, so that's Neolithic, new stone. All right, to domesticate means to tame, and in our case, we're going to look at animals, to tame an animal and keep it as a pet for help with farming. Okay, and we saw people domesticate animals for all sorts of different reasons. The wolf was domesticated to aid in hunting, and we now have our modern dogs are descendants from that. We see animals like cattle and livestock who are domesticated, or which are domesticated for us to use as farm animals to help plow fields or provide meat or provide milk for people to have. As animals were domesticated, life became easier for the people who lived during this period. Farming, which has not really come into play yet. We're going to talk about the agricultural revolution later on, but you see here on the picture behind me of someone using an ox to draw a plow behind them. And that's a farming tool, something that we'll see later on as people began to understand how farming worked. But even before farming, having animals that could produce meat or milk was something that would provide a much greater level of nutrition for the people who lived during this time, and they could live longer and healthier lives as a result of this. So domestication is something that, again, moves us a step closer to our more modern lives. Okay, here we go. All right, systemic agriculture. This is when we start to get into the agricultural revolution. One of the really cool things that transitions us between the prehistoric period and a period where we have civilization. We have people living in large cities and societies, and they're developing governments, and we're moving into that modern era, is the fact that people figured out that you could plant seeds and you could grow a crop. And you no longer had to chase whatever food source was nearby to the next location and live that nomadic lifestyle. Now people could stay in one area and they could grow their food where they lived. And that made life so much easier. But systemic agriculture is where we look at purposeful farming. Okay, it's any type of agriculture, which means it means farming. Okay, any type of agriculture that is done purposefully and orderly. Farmers planting seeds, tending their crops, weeding the field, making sure that nothing else is going to come in and destroy their crops, providing water for those crops so that they will grow, and then harvesting those crops. That is systemic agriculture. Okay, and it's something that started a very long time ago, is something that we still see today when you drive by a cornfield or a soybean field or cotton field, and you see all of these beautiful rows of plants that are growing because those farmers have planted them in a precise way, and they are growing them intentionally so that they can harvest the crop. All right, guys, our last term for the prehistoric period is specialization. And this is something really cool that happens. We'll talk about this with the 8 features of civilization. But specialization is where people could concentrate on becoming an expert in one particular subject or skill. Okay, as farming increased and people were able to grow more and more crops, all of a sudden you weren't needed as much as a hunter. And we had enough farmers to supply the needs of the people as far as food was concerned. Now people could look at other areas to specialize in. They could develop these job skills. And you see here some of the ones that are listed on the board. You've got farming, you've got siding, painting, inspection, shipping. These are all things that are modern specializations for job skills. But people back then could learn how to do woodworking. They could become a carpenter, or they might become a stonemason, and they could learn to shape stone into tools that could be used. And a person could develop these skills that were very particular. And that began to create a division of labor. And we began to see people who maybe didn't have the job skills as a carpenter would trade work with a carpenter, and they could build something for them, and in return I might barter something and say, hey, as a farmer, I'll give you 5 bushels of grain if you will build this for me. And people could specialize in these particular job skills. And again, that's moving us from a society which is just constantly in search of food to a society where people are developing skills and they're becoming experts in their particular field, which is a really cool thing. Again, all of this is moving us into the historic period. So from the prehistoric period into a period where we do have written records and we know about the people who lived and we know what laws they had. We know the battles that they fought. We know how their society operated. And so we're moving into that. I hope that this video was helpful for you guys. And as you watch it, again, make sure that you are putting your notes onto your vocabulary sheet, which is linked below using the Cami tool. And we'll talk to you later.